Good morning, Blue Iris community. This is Sam. I have Ken on the line as well. Happy Friday. Today's topic is triggers tab uncovered. So let me start with a brief review, like where we're at and where we're coming from. So I've been diving deep into these last few weeks on probably the biggest workhorse and most valuable capabilities of Blue Iris, which is trigger, record, and alerts. And I kind of worked a little bit backwards because I started with record just because Ken put a whole bunch of new features in there. And these recordings and presentations are on YouTube, and I'll reference that in a second. And then from there, I deep dive into the alerts. Like, how do you, once you record and get things of interest, how do you actually send the alerts? And now we're going back to where it all begins with the trigger tab. And how do you identify points of interest on your cameras to start recording on, and therefore alert you based off of what you think is important or not important from activity on your cameras. Okay, so that being said, let me dive into today's topic, which is triggers. Okay, so some housekeeping. As always, participants are muted until the Q&A session, which we have at the end. And that we'll start with the topic of today if you have specific questions on the trigger tab, and then we open it up to general questions that you may have based off of use cases and things you're trying to solve for your cameras. Ask questions in the Q&A dialogue. As I mentioned, Ken is on the call as well, and he's monitoring that very thoroughly. We are recording. The recordings are always on the YouTube channel, and I'll reference that right now as a reminder. YouTube is YouTube/C/Blue Iris Support/ it's just that's / videos. That gives you all the videos. We do cut it up and try to organize it a little bit, and so we have playlists. And if you're new to these webinars, you should start with the onboarding playlist, and this has all the stuff to really get you up to speed quickly. And so it starts with connecting cameras, remote access, there's a whole bunch of topics here. And so that gets you up to speed quickly. And then the other section is about the tips and tricks, is like the more advanced stuff. This will be fleshed out more once we finish most of the basic capabilities of Blue Iris. And so the web interface we talked about a little bit, large enterprise deployments. We had a case study with a reseller that had over 64 cameras deployed with a couple of Blue Iris instances. And then we had a performance and troubleshooting webinar. So that's kind of like the way we break it up. And this will be fleshed out more and more with more advanced topics as we get time in the future to dive into them. So that's the YouTube channel. And then, as always, the best place to start is a forum, in my opinion, just because it has links to the videos, the corresponding videos for every presentation. So we're fleshing this out more and more as well. And so if you go to the blueiris.com, blueirissoftware.com/forum, you get to the main page. This is all user discussions. The top half is more content that we create. And the way we break it down is similar to the YouTube channel with onboarding stuff, like the brass tacks, basic stuff that pretty much everybody needs to know to get Blue Iris working in your environment. And then the tips and tricks corresponds to the playlist on tips and tricks. And it gives you more of the advanced topics. And if you go to any particular article, usually at the top, if there's a corresponding webinar, boom, you can go right to it from the article. So this is kind of the presentation associated with each webinar. And so you can read through it, and you can also read through it and listen to the webinar if you prefer. Okay, so that's all our self-help stuff. just as a reminder, and especially for the people that are new. All right, so let's get into it. Triggers and alerts. So this is kind of the mental model that I have, and I've been kind of sharing with you guys about how Blue Iris is connected to all these different features and functionality in the software. And so, like, once you understand, once you have like a model of how the software is working, it becomes much easier to figure out what the dialogues you're doing, because there's so many features, there's so many dialogues. It's hard to keep it all straight in your head, right? So the big takeaway here is you have these things, these inputs, like from the world, right? Like you have sensors, you have cameras, you have object detection and like advanced capabilities from the cameras. You have audio inputs. You can have like a microphone at your site, like for gun detection, for example. We have other sensors like for what, like within Blue Iris itself, to like see if the cameras went dead or something, which we refer to as watchdog. You can have like external sources like a motion sensor that's placed somewhere strategically that triggers a camera. So like these are inputs from the outside world that Blue Iris can digest and do interesting stuff with. And what are those interesting things that it can do? Well, it's all the alert stuff, like all the stuff on the right. It can send you an alert, an SMS alert, an email alert, a push notification. A lot of you guys have home automation, and so you use the do commands to like, push out commands to your home automation systems. And so that's kind of the concept here. Like you get these inputs from the world, Blue Iris can process them, and then make meaning of it, and then provide you the action that you want based off of those inputs. And another very important takeaway that I try to provide in these webinars is like, how do you connect these concepts to the user interface as well as the dialogues? So like, where did I get this list of triggers? Well, it's the trigger source and zones that's in the application. Like, it's just a copy. It's just a, all I did was like manipulate it and put it in a more visually appealing format versus the dialogues. So like this comes straight from the dialogues on the alerts tab. So if I go back to Blue Iris, and I go to alerts, what world inputs do I want to be concerned about for this camera in regards to alerts? Well, this is how you decide. Like this is how you do the wiring from here and what's of interest to you in terms of sending an alert for that particular camera. So that's important. So like, make sure you can map this concept into dialogues. So that's where the trigger stuff comes from. The alert stuff, same thing. Like if I go to the action map, this list right here is just the list in the dialogue for the action map. These are all the things you can do from Blue Iris based off of whatever you find of interest or inputs from Blue Iris, okay? And that comes, if you're new to Blue Iris, that's this list right here. These are all the things you can do based off of inputs that's coming into your system. Okay, and then the other big thing is, so we talked about like, the triggers and the alerts and how you connect the wiring between the two. And then now we're gonna talk about the important tab in the middle, recording. Like you want to record what's on your cameras, like when you find things of interest. And that's like this middle part, like this is like the workhorse of Blue Iris, where like it takes all your cameras from 0 to 64. If you want to record it all, every camera 24/7, you can, like whatever your recording settings are. And then it organizes and provides and dumps it into recordings / files on your system that you can review later when you want to. So that's the way I think about Blue Iris. So yes, I just want to share that. And so knowing this makes, applying the functionality a little bit easier, at least for me it does. And so today we talk about the most common things that you guys use Blue Iris for is you want motion alerts, things of interest from your cameras, and you want to send notifications to yourselves based off of that. And so we're, this is like a repeated topic because it's so popular. and we're gonna dive into this part from the aspect of the trigger side. Last week, 2 weeks ago, we dived into it from the alert side. Okay, so if you've been attending the last couple of webinars, this was like one of the biggest mental models that maps what's going on with the user interface with what's going on with the software. And so I'm going to spend some more time on this just because I think repeating this is of value. Okay, so if you know Blue Iris kind of well with the user interface, you know what you're familiar with the clips list, and these are the alerts / motion triggers that came from the clip list, right? So this camera ADF3 on June 7th fired at 7:03 p.m. I had recording set to when triggered, so it recorded for 12 seconds, and I had AI turned on, said nothing was found. And so this information, this is in our database, and we record this based off of your trigger settings. Okay, so these are your motion triggers, and then this also corresponds to the timeline. So here's trigger 1, here's trigger 2. I mean, here's trigger 1 on the bottom, 7:02, and then 7:03, and then here's like right before 7:03 p.m. This, you can see the image as well lines up. So the timeline is just a complete, a different representation of the exact same information. So that's important to understand. And now that you understand UI, you can start digesting what's going on behind the scenes, like what Blue Iris is thinking when it's providing this information, and which is really cool because instead of like messing with once you have the settings and you want to see what's going on, like you can visually see from Blue Iris what's going on. And so it makes it much easier to figure out what's going on with your software, what your settings are doing, as well as fine tuning it when you need to. Okay, so let me dive into the model here. So cameras come in, all this data is coming in to Blue Iris, and big takeaway is cameras comes in with information and we dump it into files based off your recording settings. That's the first takeaway. The second takeaway is how do you want to identify things of interest? So like why was this time determined by Blue Iris to be important, and what do we do based off of that? Okay, so all that stuff is based off of your trigger settings. So this 1 second, the make time is one of the settings in your trigger settings, which we're going to talk about in a second. All those knobs and buttons in the trigger dialog is what determines things of interest to, okay, this is really important, I should start recording. And so that really important, I should start recording or make note of it or send an alert is based off of this trigger lead edge image. So this red is when Blue Iris finally decides like, this is important enough to me based off my trigger settings that I should start doing something, either sending an alert or recording the cameras. Okay, and we're going to dive into this 1 second in a second, which is all part of the trigger settings. So now you know what this trigger leading edge is. Like this is like the trigger settings decided like, all right, this is really, I'm sensing something of importance. Okay, I confirmed this is important based off of all your settings and met all your setting restrictions. I'm going to start doing something. And so at this point is when Blue Iris starts recording information. So like this is the reason why you get all this information is because you told Blue Iris this is the point in time where things are important, and it pulls all that data and stores in the database and shows it to you visually in the clip list. Okay. And then so those are why you get these alerts. And then based off of the alerts, all the stuff in the back end of it is based off your recording settings. And so I'm not going to dive into the recording webinar, but basically the default is 10 seconds, which is your break time in your trigger settings. So most alerts are 10 seconds. This is a little bit longer, 12 seconds. And so I have when triggered as my default settings, and so that's why it's recording. But you can change it. You can have continuous, whatever. I don't want to go into all the recording stuff, but that's why this is a moment of interest. That's why it's on the database, and based off your record settings, is you determine like whether you record some of it or if you have like a continuous settings, just keep recording all of it. But these are markers when in the alert list to identify things of importance, whether you record always or when triggered or when alerted. And then in the front of it, so if you have like a pre-trigger buffer, I have 5 seconds, then that's also included. And so that's why some stuff before the alert is recorded. It's because you set your pre-trigger buffer. And what's cool about Blue Iris in terms of details is with the timeline, that blue in front of the actual alert, well, that is your pre-trigger, and that's visually telling you that you have a pre-trigger buffer and there's stuff in there. And so do you have to, it's another like little, it's subtle, but it's powerful because you don't have to go back to your settings, right? You can just look at your visually and you can see that, okay, for this camera, for this alert, I have a pre-trigger buffer of some specified time because visually I can see the blue in front of the alert. Like cool little details that makes life easier once you know like what's going on. So that's what's one big little, not big, but like little, little takeaway like you should make note of. So that's what the blue is in front of an alert, a motion trigger alert in the timeline. And so here's trigger 1. So like here's, that's representing this, and then here's trigger 2, and same thing, like based off of the trigger settings, you identify the next point of time, and that's why this was recorded in the database as a moment of interest. And the only difference I made here is like, I haven't changed the settings. Like these both have a pre-trigger buffer visually, but if it didn't have a pre-trigger buffer, you would just record from the trigger leading edge to whatever your recording settings are. Okay, so that's the only difference that could happen between a trigger 1 and trigger 2 if you have a pre-trigger buffer or don't have a pre-trigger buffer. And the other really cool thing is like if you start observing your UI like while it's running, you'll notice like in the clip list itself, you'll notice like it'll flip, right? Like it'll start off with the camera and the moment in time, and it'll say snapshot, and then it'll flip to like 12 seconds, and then the AI results. And why does it flip? Well, now it's got more information. So this is when it started, like at the beginning of the trigger, and at the end of it, it has all this information, like how long did it record for, as well as what were the AI results of that recording. And so if you're ever wondering like why does it flip, well, that's why. And it's a really cool way of like just seeing, like once you know this, like visually seeing what's going on with the software. So again, another little mental note with visuals that provides you like what's going on behind the scenes. Okay, I know I took a lot of time on that. I know I repeated this last week, as 2 weeks ago, as well as 2 weeks ago from that, because it's just really important that you understand what's going on with Blue Iris, and then you can map it to the UI, and it becomes like life just becomes a lot easier in terms of like figuring out what's going on with your system. Okay, so today is about, so this is the new stuff. So this is triggers dialog. So I'm gonna dive into all the knobs on the trigger tab, and keep in mind like all the stuff, what it does is it determines this 1 second and determines these red lines. Like when do you think there's enough activity on your cameras that something is important and you should start doing something, whether it be sending alert, triggering your home automation, sending, doing recordings, whatever. Like whatever you decide to do is up to you. But today's conversation is all about like how do you decide like what's important with all the feeds coming in from your cameras. And the top half is about, similar to like mini dialogue. You have a top half, which is about, setting your triggers. And then the bottom half is about like actions you can take based off of what those settings are. And so that's kind of the way to think about the dialogue. And that's why I have the highlighted and separated out so that mentally you realize that. And then down below is the break time. And I referenced that before, like how long after you find out something of importance do you want to keep analyzing, because of the trigger tab, and it keeps analyzing the activity on that camera for 10 seconds, and it reach like if there's activity within those 10 seconds, it'll continue extending it. So you don't have to worry about like it keep recording or not recording or keep identifying activity. It just does it behind the scenes automatically, which is really, really nice. Okay, so that's a trigger tab, and I'm going to deep dive into the 1 second. Okay, before I go into the deep dive into 1 second, I want to call out the bottom half just because it's a little bit easier to digest. It's quick, and I think it needs to be called a little bit just so that everyone understands the different options. So the default is database only, and what that does is when you identify something of importance, it writes to the database and it's on the clip list. Like this is how you get information that things of importance happen on your cameras. So that's what database only does, like just writes the database. Now there's other options. All the other stuff is like hard copies. So like high res JPEGs and export to MP4. Well, if you're recording motion triggers or you're doing high res JPEGs, this is when your alerts folder starts getting populated. Like for the longest time, I never used the alerts folder. Like I would just have database only because it was fine. But now with the AI and the fine tuning, I started using it, especially when I am trying to like fine tune, because the high res JPEG, it gives you the image in the alerts folder associated with that alert. So like here's the alert. It's a small snapshot in your clips list. I can find it easily in the alerts folder and blow it up if I really want to see what's going on with that image. And so I've been using that more and more just because I like it with fine tuning my system. And so it's something to be aware of. And like in these webinars, I want to show you like some of the things I've learned with trying to fine tune my system and share these little nuggets of tips and tricks that's in the software that you may not be aware of. So like for example, once I have high res JPEGs going, I can go. I think that was for ADS. I think I turned off camera ADS7. So let me highlight ADS7, and then if you right click and do open containing folder, it'll find it for you, which is awesome. And so like my alerts folder is obviously getting populated more and more because I've been fine tuning for a while, like for some level of time. And so Blue Arts will find the image for you. And so like all these little things just makes life easier in terms of trying to fine tune stuff. So it's thinking, it's scanning the folder, it found it, there it is, here's my preview, and it highlights it, and voila. There's the image associated with, I think I clicked on this one, so here it is. So I like this. So like, if I wanted to figure out like what's going on, having this snapshot of the trigger image kind of helps me out. And I'm alluding to this here, but I'll talk about it more later. There's a fantastic new feature that just came out like last week with fine tuning AI. And so basically it provides a lot of clarity on exactly what's going on with software, and I'll demonstrate that later. But because of that, when you turn it on, the troubleshooting, Blue starts creating these DAT files. And because I have the high res JPEGs and the file names are pretty much the same except for the extension, it makes it really easy for me. It's just like a little bonus that I kind of like, that I see the correlation, so it's like easy to figure out like which data is associated with my particular alert that I'm trying to figure out or debug or whatever. So another little value add that I've discovered, and why I'm starting to use high res JPEGs more and more than I did before. Okay, so that's a little golden nugget. And okay, so that's kind of like the important stuff. Like what are these selections, and why? There's many reasons to use it. That's one of the reasons I use the high res JPEGs. And a lot of you guys just like hard copies. And so like you want the MP4s, you want the JPEGs, and the alerts folder, like wherever that is, you'll sync that to your Dropbox or your Google Drive. And so you have like cloud recordings of your triggers. And that's another reason why these options are available. The other stuff, I mean, Ken's on the line, so if you have questions on the other stuff, I haven't really played with it. Please ask during Q&A. Okay, back to the top. So now we're going to deep dive into the 1 second. All right. So from all this stuff is based off of the motion sensors configure dialog. I kind of skipped over the other two, but keep in mind, like you can trigger your camera's record and send alerts based off of Blue Iris's motion sensors software. Or like a lot of you guys have like those cameras getting smarter, and they have like AI detection as well, and you want to leverage that as well. So you can have the camera's capabilities of motion, like AI and motion sensors. Like you can leverage that if you wanted to, and have that trigger Blue Iris record. And you can have DIO inputs and stuff too. So like there's other things that can trigger your cameras besides motion sensors. But I'm going to dive into what Blue Iris comes with in the software itself and what most of you guys use all the time. Okay, so the make time is what I'm going to dive into, and these are all the knobs that you can use to decide, like from something you send something on your cameras to like there's enough here that I want to start recording and send an alert. Okay, like this 1 second. Okay, so in terms of the diagram, I just blew this up. Like this, it's still 1 second, but I just want to expand it and dive into what's going on. So the most important part here is this notion of sense, motion, trigger. Okay, so these settings up top kind of drives a lot of like what decides what's important in Blue Iris. And so the sense is based off of your contrast. Like you see how it says more on the left and less on the right. So if you go to the left, you're making that camera more and more sensitive to color changes. And what does that mean? Like these boxes that you see visually when you turn on highlights in your cameras, that's the one-to-one mapping that you have to like kind of realize. Like as you like reduce this, the sensitivity of the cameras go up, and the number of pixels that you'll see that are changing will go higher. So the cameras becoming more and more sensitive, like Blue Iris is identifying more and more changes in the cameras, which may be good or bad. Like it may lead to like a ton of false alarms, or it could lead to like more accuracy of not missing alarms. So like deciding what's right for you is based off of the behavior of your scene as well as your camera. Okay. But now you know what's going on, like visually, and so it makes it a lot easier to like adjust this based off what you're seeing on the video itself, which is a huge value add. So now once you understand that, the next component is the object size. And so like the minimum object size, again, like if you go to the left, you're making that object size smaller and smaller. So like, and it shows you like in relationship to the scene itself. Like as I move this left and right, this minimum object size goes up and down. And so you visually see here what's going on, but you also see it with your highlights. So like based off of that setting, how small or big you make the minimum object size is when Blue Iris decides like there's enough here to like identify an object. And this is the motion, like sense, motion, like there's enough pixel changes to identify an object, and that's in yellow. And then is that persistent enough? Like, is it like a fly flying through your scene and it just in and out, boom, don't trigger? Or has that motion persisted enough, i.e. 1 second, to consider it something of importance? And that's why it went from yellow to orange. Okay, so the sense motion trigger is like it's all there visually. And so how do you know like what these settings should be? They're like there's no like there's defaults obviously that comes with software, but all these settings is 100% based off of your cameras and what they're viewing. Because like look at all my cameras, like every setting is different. Like none of my motion settings are the same for every camera, even though like it's the same scene, geographically, but it's not, right? Because I'm like configure like these settings, like why did I choose 204 and 40? I just played with it. And it worked best for me for this scene. Like this is like a higher perspective, a much higher, like a larger view of an area versus this thing. Like this is just looking at the front gate really tightly focused in. Like the pixels per foot is a measurement that people use to like determine um uh, like just different heuristics. Like in AI it's really important, like in terms of like the pixels for per foot determines like how much detail you're getting from the scene. So like um it changes for what you're viewing. And so the pixels per foot here is the sorry, it's a little bit confusing. Pixels per foot here is lower than here because it's a much bigger area that's being covered by this one camera. And the pixels per foot here is even small. Pixels per foot is even higher here because it's really tight. It's really tightly tied in to the back gate of this building. And so because of that, because the perspective is so different depending on what you're looking at, there is no right answer for like what is good settings. It's all based off of like what you're looking at. That's the bottom line to the story. So like that's why there's defaults, but they don't make sense. It's all based off of like what you're looking at. Okay. But now that you know that, and now that you know how this stuff ties into the visuals, it becomes much easier to like set this correctly for you to get the right types of you know things to trigger on versus not trigger on. Okay, and so like this here, like uh, the only reason I put this bar here is like when does it go yellow? When does enough objects, um, enough little pixels turn into a box? Well, it's somewhere within this 1 second. Like you don't know exactly when it does, but when it does, that's what I'm trying to show here. And then if that lasts for like 1 second, is when like this whole duration has to be at least 1 second is when it actually fires. So if you're confused like why I have this orange here, I'm just saying like somewhere within this 1 second, there was enough pixels that were together to make a box. And that box fulfilled the minimum object size. Okay, so that's the most important concept I want to provide you in terms of these knobs, and then how to like set these knobs to work in your environment. The other stuff, I did a webinar like many weeks ago on triggers and alerts. It's in the onboarding. It's one of the fundamental. Oops, playing it. The triggers and alerts webinars, I dive into all the knobs in triggers. So I'm not going to go through all of that. Review that to get, if you want to deep dive on the rest of the stuff. But just keep in mind, this is the concept from that webinar. So you start, these are the fundamentals: the sense, motion, trigger, minimum contrast, minimum object, minimum duration. But the bottom stuff, you can filter even more, like that object that was defined, this object, it's got to, you can say like it's got to travel at least, depending on which camera is, oops, some distance, the default is 100 pixels. And then object size exceeds, like that's in object detection as well. These are like, this is the one for if a whole bunch of pixels change, just like the lighting change fix. Like if a whole bunch of pixels change, i.e. like 67%, i.e. more than this box right here visually, like if a lot of pixels changed, well, that probably means your lighting changed. Like it went this, if it's an outdoor camera, it went from the clouds to sunlight, like, or vice versa. And so that's why this knob is there, and why it's useful, especially for outdoor cameras. And then zone, same thing. Like, if you want to make sure like there's motion in particular areas. I'm not going to deep dive into that, but it's all there. And once you got the top three as the main, you can do more filtering to get more and more meaningful alerts. And you can reference the other webinar to get details on that. Okay, another question that comes up is, now that we have AI, are there things that I use more or less because AI can do, a lot of filtering as well to provide meaningful alerts? And so, yeah, so like the object detection stuff, I still keep the object size exceeds. I still keep this one, just because if there's a big lighting change, like if the motion sensors can block that out, like why waste resources and send it to AI that will also probably cancel the alert? But if the motion sensors can do it, why not just have it still do it? So that's why I leave this one on. The other travels, like I guess I'm more safe than sorry. Like I don't really care like how far, like if there's motion in region A or region B or whatever, I'll send it to, like whether it moves 100 pixels or not, I don't really care anymore, just because I'll just send it to AI. And if it's a person or car, I want to know. And the AI is overlaps with the motion. Like there's a lot of really powerful logic with the AI implementation that Ken created. So I rely on AI to do that now. So that's why I turn off object travels. And object crosses zones, I still have zone A, like the area of interest, because I don't want to like tax my GPU, because it's CPU intent, like AI and inferences, like it's very CPU/GPU intensive. So you don't want to waste resources, and you want to make sure there's resources available like for other cameras, right? So I definitely have my zones. So here's a good example. Triggers, configure, use zones, edit. Like I don't like all the traffic on the street. I don't really care about, right? So I just focus in on the parking lot itself as one example. So I still use the zones, but yeah, I usually just have zone A because oftentimes that's all I need. Okay. So that's the AI. Oh, let me pause for a second because I just dumped a whole bunch of information on you. I see one raised hand. Let's take a couple of questions right now before I move forward. Todd, a lot of talk. Todd, did you still have a question, or maybe not? If there's any questions from what I said so far, this is a good. Oh, Todd, okay. Yeah, just chime in right now just so that I don't lose you guys. Go ahead, Todd. You're unmuted, but we can't hear you.
Sorry, in the Q&A, he's asking if you will cover group triggers. That's his question.
Oh, okay. I did not this webinar. So we did 2 weeks ago, and there's a recording of that. Well, not group triggers, but group alerts. So no, I kind of you can ask the question about that later, and maybe we may be able to address it. But that wasn't a topic I was going to talk about this webinar. Okay, I'm going to move on since there's no more questions. Let me just review for a second so that we're all on the same page. Okay, so here's the primary engine of Blue Iris and what it's doing: triggers, alerts. It's recording in the middle. And I deep dived into the UI, and this model is like, very important. Like this is how Blue Iris determines what's important, what to record on, what to like provide information on to the users in terms of like the alerts coming from the cameras. And then we dove deep into the triggers dialogue. And the biggest takeaway here is all the stuff in triggers is just that 1 second. Like what determines what's noise and stuff that I don't care about, like leaves blowing in the wind versus a person walking to my door. And the trigger tab is what determines that and determines the point of interest, which is the red lines. And then some of the nice things that comes with Blue Iris now, like, database only is the most popular and is the default and most common because you want to see it on your alerts list. And I started using the other stuff more just because with fine tuning, the hard copies of images kind of helps me with the figuring out what's going on with my system. And then I dove into the triggers tab, the motion sensors tab in particular. And the biggest takeaway is now you can, hopefully you guys understand sense, motion, and triggers visually. And so you can do the right things for your cameras on how to set this up. And it's more of an art than it is a science. And then I alluded to the other stuff that's also part of the advanced parts of the trigger dialogue, object travels, object size exceeds, and zones. And I referenced the triggers and alerts webinar, where I dive deeper into it. And then finally, like what I started using more or less of because of AI. And the trade-offs, like there's more resources, more accurate. And so how do you balance that with, depending on how many cameras you have and what you're trying to get alerted on. Okay, so, all right, so that's a review and here's the overall picture of Blue Iris. And so the reason I'm bringing this up again is I'm gonna just walk through one from start to beginning. Like I want motion alerts, I want cameras recording when triggered, and I want to send a push notification. I'm gonna walk through one of them but not a simple one. Like the triggers and alerts webinar goes through like all the basic ones, like pretty easily. It's fairly self-intuitive. I'm gonna make this one a little bit more complicated because I found it interesting, and a couple questions came up in support, and so yeah, so I just want to share that. So here's a scenario. So triggers to alerts example. So use case: cameras are facing the driveway. Okay. And this came up from a bunch of homeowners. I want motion triggers when activity on the street, when there's activity on the street or the sidewalk. Okay. Like if there's a car driving by, I like to see it on my clip list and maybe go back to it, whatever. Like, I want to record that event. However, I only want to get alerted if someone's like pulls up into my driveway or if like someone walks onto my property, right? That makes sense, right? Like you want to do two things with the same camera. Okay. So how do you do this? I found this very interesting. So I defined a zone A. Okay, so I don't have, my cameras are facing an office building, right? So I kind of mimicked it. Like, let me show you like what I did. So what I did was, turn this active. Okay, so this is my area of interest is basically I hide the clock, but there's more to it than this. So like what I did for this driveway for this office complex is I kind of did what you guys are trying to do at home with the street versus your property. And so what I did was triggers, configure, zones. So zone A is like always, make zone A like the entire area of interest of your scene, right? That's like a good convention because you want to deal with if regions overlap or non-overlap. So yeah, so I have a zone A. Zone B is like, this is the street. Like I'm trying to like mimic the use case for a home with my camera. So like this is the street, zone B, and this is my property, zone C. So basically if something goes from B to C or C to B, I want to get alerted. But if there's like some activity on just C or just some activity on B, I don't really care about. Okay. So let me just back to inactive. I'm creating alerts. Okay. So you get it. So like the reason I'm explaining this is just to show you that the solution actually works. Let me go back to the slides. All right, so I define a zone A, the entire interest. My zone B is the road. My zone C is a property, like the inside of my area. Okay, so you saw my zone B, you saw my zone Z. So how this worked is I have object crosses zones. All I did was like told Blue Iris if anything happens in B and C, put on the clip list. Like I want a note of that. Okay. So like I want activity that's on the street and I want activity that's just on my property. Okay. And then for the action map, what I did was I want to know when there's activity between B and C, right? And the idea here is I had to put a wait and I made it 5 seconds. And after that, I said, I create an action map saying if there's activity between B and C, fire an alert. Okay. The reason I did this is the wait action gives Blue Iris time to determine whether zones B and C were crossed. So why is that important? So let me go back to my example. So you know where my zones are. If I go to camera settings and I go to alerts and I go to on alert, there's a whole bunch, don't worry about the other stuff, but just the bottom stuff. I want to get alerted only when something went from B to C or C to B. So that's, and I use all instead of like the default is any, I use all, meaning it's got to go through B and C to send an alert. So this is the magic sauce that sends an alert only when a car goes from B, the area B to area C or vice versa. Okay. And I'm going to talk about the 5 seconds in a second, which is it's a really cool feature. Like the wait, this is a wait, and I have a wait for 5 seconds. And why that's necessary, I'll just talk about in a second. So this is a wait which I've never really talked about in any webinar, but why that is needed for this to work. Okay, so what am I trying to get at? Like, so that's the answer, but what's more important is understanding like why it works. So what most people do, and what I was doing as well, like, I had to really think, I had to work through this with Ken actually to figure out like what the heck I was doing wrong. So what most people would do is this logic. You would say object crosses zones, like you want activity on the street, but you only want alerts when people walk into your driveway, right? So they would say like, give me B or B to C. That's what most people would do. That's what I did in the beginning. And why I want to explain like why that doesn't work. Because the reason it doesn't work is because what you're doing is all these conditions, as soon as all these conditions in the make time are met, as soon as one of them is met, it fires the alert. And so why is this such an important concept to understand? So like all these knobs and the logic, it's all within this 1 second. And as soon as any of these thresholds are met, it's going to fire. It's going to create the, it's going to record the event and fire the alert, okay? So why is that important? Well, the reason that's important is because when you do the logic is B or B and C, like if you guys remember your math and your Venn diagrams, like B going to C is a subset of B. Okay, so you have to understand that logic, you have to understand it first of all. Like B to like it's got to go to B before it can go from B to C, right? Obviously. So because of that, B's always going to fire. And so what does that mean? So like if B is always met, that means anytime there's activity on the street, you're going to get an alert. And that's exactly what you don't want. So like if the car is driving by, you want it to register in your database for like whatever reason, but you don't want to get alerted on that. You only want to get alerted if the guy on the street drives into your driveway, right? It goes from B to C. And so that's what you're trying to do, but this is why this logic won't work. I hope you understand that first of all. Like as soon as this is an or. So as soon as one of the conditions are met, it's going to fire. So the car that drives on the street that doesn't come in, it's going to fire then. And the car that is on the street that comes into your driveway, it's also going to fire at that time too. So you're getting all the activity. You're not getting just the subset. You're getting all of it. And so that's important to understand. So that's the gotcha. The above settings would trigger anytime there was activity in B, i.e. the street. Furthermore, all activity in the street would trigger an alert. You will still get the alert when a person approaches the house, but you get all the other activity as well, which is exactly what you don't want. So the key takeaway, the trigger fires an alert as soon as any condition is met. The zone crossing logic state B or B to C, which is equivalent to just B. Like, is there an activity on B? So that's the gotcha, that's the key takeaway, and that's why the wait isn't so important. Because when you wait, what you're telling Blue Iris is, when you wait, like instead of firing right away the alert, you're telling it to wait another 5 seconds. And so in those 5 seconds, Blue Iris is still listening and seeing if any other activity happens. And so the car may have like hit the street, area B, and then within 5 seconds, it's gonna drive into your driveway and hit area C. And now, because it hit area C, Blue Iris knows that B was fulfilled as well as B to C was fulfilled. And that allows you to like provide even smarter alerts that you find of value, okay? So that's why when I did the alert in the action map, where's the action map one? Oh, this is the wrong solution. That's why when I did B to C, it actually fired only when it hit the driveway to the house, because it had time to determine whether C was actually hit. And just to confirm that it worked, it does work. You can take my word for it, and I can also show it. So with ADF, if I go to, let's see, here's like on my database, right? Here's like cars coming in. These are the easy ones, like B to C. These all fired. These are cars driving across, like these are the standard ones, and these are all fired. And you'll take my word for it that I got the push notification. I can't prove that, but I did. And it also shows like when it just hit B, it's still registered on the database, but it didn't send the alert. June 24th, 8/13. If I go down a little bit, here's one. So here's a truck leaving. This is only in zone B. I recorded it in my database, which is what I wanted, but it didn't fire an alert. And same thing for zone C. 6:36 a.m. It's a little bit harder to find the cars that don't drive all the way through. Here's zone C. I record it in my database. I know what happened, but I don't send an alert because I don't think it's meaningful. It's a meaningful alert. So anyway, that's how you do multiple things with one camera. Okay, in a similar example, I got another ticket, pretty much same scenario. He wants to sound an alarm when there's activity in zone A or zone B. However, he wants a different sound when it goes from A to B, okay? And so same thing, I put a weight so that it can determine all the stuff that's happened between, if it just hit A, if it just hit B, or if it hit A and B. So I put the weight, and then I said, where is it? A and B, if it's just A or just B, sound one alarm. If it's A and B, goes from A to B, send a different alarm. So that's how he was able to fulfill his use case. And then don't forget to pay attention to the logic. So like when you go create this action map for AB, don't forget it's got to be all. Like it's got to hit A and B, like all of them, before it sends the alert. The default is any, which means if it hits A or B, which is it's not going to provide the restriction that you wanted. So the logic is important as well. So like make sure it's all, so that it's saying A and B has to both have it had to have gone through both A and B before the I saw you alarm was sent. Okay, that's it for today's webinar. Again, the recording I'm recording right now will be placed in the YouTube channel, and then I'll have this posted in the forum as well. Triggers tab uncovered. Okay, we can open for questions. Ellen, allowed to talk.
Can you, on that last topic, clarify how you might balance the weight with your make and break time? Because what I'm picturing is, especially if you're dealing with people, which might be a little less predictable than vehicles. If a vehicle came into zone B, loitered there for 6 seconds, and then crossed to C, you wouldn't get it in certain scenarios because it would wait 5 seconds, not have seen it in both zones. But I'm thinking that with your make time, your break time, there might be a way to make that less likely, or maybe even prevent it entirely. Is that the case?
So from the top of my head, so that's a very important call out that you just provided. So why did I pick the 5 seconds, right? I picked the 5 seconds because I'm thinking for my scenario, that's enough time for the car to drive between B to C. Now you just called out, like, suppose I'm like watching these cameras and I'm getting alert on B and C, and like, suppose I'm looking at my history, and I'm seeing like, well, some of these cars are driving super slow and it's more than 5 seconds. I would increase the wait time. Like that's like the easiest thing for me to do. I would increase it from 5 to like 7 or 10, like making sure that I captured all the activities that I want to be alerted on. But I'll table to Ken, like, is another way. Go ahead.
If your wait and break time are identical, would that tend to ensure that each alert, yeah, I guess what I'm getting at is the break time is from the end of motion, but this wait is a hard-coded number. I guess that's where I'm seeing it could have a loophole.
But the break time's not fixed. So like that car scenario that you're talking about, like it's in zone B for 6 seconds, right? So if it's stopped and there's no motion, so you're right. So then that motion trigger is going to stop.
Right.
So 100% you're correct. But if that thing moves a little bit, it's going to re-trigger, right? Because there's more there's constant motion. There's like some re-triggering of the motion, which is going to keep that event continuing, right?
Yeah, I'm trying to wrap my brain around how you would solve this, and I don't have an answer, but it seems like it would be good if those two were somehow tied, that basically as long as the motion is going, that you then just give it, how much time. I don't know how to articulate, but I think you get what I'm and Ken probably gets what I'm getting at, which is a person could take a circuitous route through the zone, they could loiter, they could different things. But if it's really what you're really trying to emulate here is line crossing detection, but it's not truly line crossing. It's because the way you're doing the weight, someone could take 6 seconds in zone C before they get to zone B. They do cross the line, the object travels across that line, but you stop looking for it because the way you're alerting.
100%. Like there's a level of brittleness associated with timing, right? And that's always the case. So like it's not 100% a line crossing, but yeah, I mean that could be a limitation depending on what your use cases are and scenarios. But
all right, cool, thanks.
Yeah. Okay, Josh, allowed to talk.
Thanks. I am curious what settings affect the level of virtual memory and page file usage.
I more information maybe, like Ken, can you answer this?
Well, yeah, the amount of memory used is really dependent on the frame sizes for your cameras. So the higher resolution cameras will use more memory, and the software keeps about a 1 second buffer of those frames. So if you have the max frame rate at 30, you just multiply your frame size by 4 bytes per frame by 30, and that's the amount of memory you need for that one camera. But then the next in line using a lot of memory could be your pre-trigger buffers. So if you have 10 seconds of pre-trigger, that will keep everything coming from that camera for 10 seconds. So depending on your bit rate from the camera, you can multiply that out and see what that's using. And then of course there are bitmaps used all over the place for various things. So you need a lot of scratch memory on top of that as well. And then beyond just Blue Iris, if you have Deep Stack running, that could use a tremendous amount of memory. Really, you should take a look, especially if you add the servers. There's a face server, there's an object server, there's a custom model server. When those are all three running, they do add. You can look at the Windows Task Manager or the Process Explorer, and that will give you a good overview of what's using memory. So one of the takeaways from what I just said was the max frame rate, it tends to bump up sometimes, and it may be at 30. If your camera is only at 10 frames per second, you will gain a lot of free memory by just lowering that back down to 10. That's one thing you can do right away.
All right, fantastic. That's what I needed to know. I appreciate it.
Welcome.
Okay, thanks, Josh.
I should add that if you're doing dual streaming, really you have to add that as well. That's two different frame buffers of 1 second each. So use the resolution from the substream as well as the mainstream.
Right. Okay. No other raised hands, no other issue. Like we can open this up. If there's no other questions on triggers themselves, we can open it up to like problems that you're facing that you need help on as well. So Jorge, allowed to talk.
Yeah, good morning. I have Amcrest cameras, and before I had a Blue Iris, I had them connected to the NVR, and it was displaying, they're 5 megapixels, so it was displaying the 5 megapixels and it looked real good. Then I brought them into Blue Iris, and the image on the screen is not the same as when I had it on the NVR. So I don't know if I'm missing a step or something. I do have them on dual streams. I have the substream and the mainstream, and they do flip from the substream to the mainstream. but it's still not the same quality image displaying on the monitor than when I was on the NVR.
Oh, you're talking about, I think you're talking about that color issue. You fixed that, right, Ken? If I recall.
Well, just using the word quality is not very specific. You'd be best to send us an example image. There are some settings in Blue Iris that you can use to adjust quality for scaling. That's the number one. That's on the settings cameras page. By default, it uses a fast scaling, which may reduce some quality, but to save CPU.
Where's the scaling? It's in the camera settings?
No, it's in the main settings page, and there's a cameras page. Then the other thing, sometimes people use the word quality and in reference to remote access. So that's controlled by compression, and there's a compression setting. So first, wait, Sam, go back to the cameras. Oh, there it is. It's actually in other, yes. Correct. So you can actually increase that to bilinear or bicubic, and it will increase the quality of the display, especially with high megapixel cameras that have to be sized down to be put on the display. Sometimes that can lead to scaling artifacts. But of course, it's a trade-off. It uses more CPU.
Okay.
Anything else other than fast?
Anything else other than fast will use CPU, but I could try those other two, right?
You're certainly welcome to do that. The other thing that might happen, because if there's a pipeline of frames that goes through, it could potentially slow it down, especially for high megapixel cameras. So you just have to experiment. If you see a lag occurring, like slowly it becomes 1 minute behind in real time, that could be a sign that that pipeline has become too slow. And that's one of the reasons, could be the scaling right here.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much. I'll look into that. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Jorge. Michael Lamb. Haven't seen that name in a long time.
Hey, Sam. Good morning, guys.
Hey, Michael.
Hey, got a quick question. I was using highlight motion to, tweak the sensitivity.
Sure.
And when you put a highlight motion on, you can see the motion move only in all cameras. But when you click on the camera that you want to focus on, the highlight motion disappear. Like it's not only showed up on all camera, but not single camera. Is that something I'm missing, or is that just how it is?
Are you talking about live view, right? Like what I'm
Yes,
showing right now?
that is correct. Live view right now, there's nothing, if
Nothing
you go
moving, right?
yeah, if you go all camera, you can see it on top. ADF's cam, yeah. If you see all cam, if you gotta go to all camera.
Why?
Right now, that's how, I don't know why it doesn't show me the highlight motion if I select one camera.
Okay, let me turn mine's not on right now. Hold on.
And if you go all camera, you should see the highlight.
Why is it going to 0? Hold on, sorry, I messed up. What did I do? It says it's on 0 for some reason. Schedule. I don't want to override.
Yeah.
Oh. I was like, what the heck going on? Okay, there you go. Okay, so when don't you see the highlights? Like
Right now.
the way it is right now? Like
Oh, there you go. You can see it. But
Yeah,
mine,
yeah.
when I click on a single, like if you go on the top right, say ADF camera, is that all camera? No, right? You single out one right now. If you
I
view
s-
all camera, I could see it. But if I click on one camera like you right now, it won't show me the highlight motion. So it's kind of hard for me to do troubleshoot to set up the sensor.
That's a new one, Michael. I've never heard of that.
Yeah,
You could start by maybe export the camera settings and send that over to us, just that .reg file for the one camera.
yeah, I think it's just me. Sorry, guys. Thanks.
yeah, it should work. I mean, I don't do anything special.
Yeah, I
here.
saw yours working. Let me troubleshoot. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thanks, Michael. Brian, allowed to talk.
Good afternoon.
Hello.
Thank you for this webinar. It's very interesting. I have two quick little questions for you. Your frame rates per camera. I have a client that has 28 cameras on site, and I had to reduce them down to 15 frames per second. Is there any value to or showing his difference between a 10 frame, 15 frame, and should we always keep them, if possible, to 30 frames?
I mean, this is my 2 cents, and Ken, you can chime in too. But I think there's no value in, as far as, I mean, unless you're watching cameras yourselves, like you have the security guards like watching it 24/7, which most people don't. I think 15 frames per second is plenty good in terms of AI as well as motion sensors. That's my 2 cents. But Ken, you can chime in if you have more info.
I missed the reason why you had to reduce it from 30. What was the reason?
It was just CPU and GPU. It was just maxing out. As soon as I reduced down to 15, everything is really running steady and it's really running smoothly. That's there. I just know if I was giving up any kind of quality because going from 30 to 15.
Well, yeah, CPU would be a consideration. Are you using the other features to keep CPU under control, like the dual streaming?
Yes, correct.
Yeah. Yeah, at that point, it's just saving the mainstream to disk, then it's not decoding it all the time. But if you're doing any webcasting or that with the mainstream running, then yeah, we'll have to decode all of that still, so it will use CPU.
But the quality itself is, you're not giving up much quality when you're going from 30 to 15. You're not like watching.
Yeah, if that's your direct question, not the CPU, then yeah, really the default is 10, which is fine for most security purposes. Going above that is, you know, at your discretion if you have spare CPU, basically.
Okay, the added question to that, if I drop things down to 10 or 15, do you also have to go into each individual camera and set those to the same frame rates as Blue Iris?
Yeah, exactly. You must actually.
Okay.
There's no frame rate setting in Blue Iris. The setting that you see on the video tab is called max frame rate. It's not frame rate. And what it is, it's the maximum observed frame rate that comes from the camera. And it's really only used to allocate buffers and to anticipate for encoding and decoding what might be coming from the camera. It's not used to control what comes from the camera. You have to go into each camera's web interface and set the frame rate. Most cameras you encounter now have this setting. So, I mean, there were some old ones like the initial Foscam that didn't have one, and it just forced you to use 30. But for most cameras, you can go and change there.
Okay, that's great. And one last quick one here. The client is missing some frame rates. It's an auto body shop, and clients sometimes like to take their tools. So 1 second, you'll see them bending down, picking up a tool, and then you don't see it about, you know, a couple seconds later that it's in the person's pocket, and they walk about 5 feet and they don't see him actually bending down, picking it up. They see him over it, but they never see him picking it up. and then it's
The
just
simple
disappears.
solution to that is to increase the break time. So what
Okay,
happens
great.
probably is somebody's walking over, it's detected, it's only triggered for 5 seconds, and then they stop moving, and then the recording stops, and then they start moving again. So yeah, I would increase that, to whatever it takes, 20 seconds, 30 seconds.
Okay.
That's just the amount of recording that will happen after once it's triggered.
Okay, great. That's what I did. It seemed to clear it up. I just wanted to verify, and it seems to be working fine now. I just want to make sure that was that one setting. Perfect. Thank you guys very much.
Hey, thanks, Brian. Go ahead, Josh. Do you have another question?
Yes, I do. Thank you. This one's actually regarding the zone crossing setup that you have. I kind of want to do something similar to that, but not necessarily do I need crossing to happen. I would love to have set up a zone A and a zone B, and anything that is recorded or any motion that happens in zone B is recorded but not alerted, but any motion that happens in zone A is recorded and alerted. And there can be crossing, or the motion can just originate only in A. Is that something I can do by splitting the screen in half, or is that still multiple alerts with crossing as well?
No, that seems pretty straightforward. So you have two, all you care about is two regions, right? Like you have a B and a C. I'm assuming A will always be your area of, the entire area of interest of the camera.
Okay.
So you have,
Well, then there would be 3 zones, the entire interest, and then it just for simplicity, let's bisect the screen in half, and one half is B and the other half is C. So everything that happens in B, I want an alert, even if it came from C or if it originated in B.
yeah, exactly. So like, let me just reiterate that first point. So like, best practice for all you guys is just define zone A as the camera's area of interest. So like, you have to deal with, there's a stuff like with overlaps. I don't want to get into like all those details, but like if the zones and overlap and stuff like that, that can kind of mess you up. So but just best practice, like define your zone A. Okay, so this is my camera. So I'm gonna clear it right now, just like you can see the actual zones that I'm actually really, paying attention to. And I'm showing this to you guys because all the stuff is in Blue Iris, and so like, visually seeing is like a huge bonus. Like it just makes life so much easier. So I'm showing you like how I would do it, as well as like showing you the capabilities I'm leveraging from Blue Iris itself to make my life easier. So like I just cleared zone A, right? Just because I want to see the actual regions I really care about. So check this out. So like by just doing that, like boom, like how easy is that? Like now I visually see on my camera, like this is my zone B, this is my zone C, right? I'm breaking up the problem into the different pieces. So now in your situation, all you said was like for zone B, don't alert, but record, like keep track of it. And for zone C, send an alert as well as keep track of it, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's super easy. So like all you have to do. So now you understand you still have
But
that
there can
zone
also
A.
be crossing as well.
Oh, that's
It's
fine.
not just, yeah.
Because so here's the thing, like the crossing, like it goes back to that Venn diagram concept. Like let's see, let me go back to my slides. So if you had a zone B, let me see if I can, I'll just draw on this PowerPoint, and you had insert and you had a zone C, right? Here's C, here's B, and you wanted also B to C, or you don't care if C to B. Okay, wait, I gotta overlap it a little bit. So this is the B to C, right? This intersection, right? if you understand Venn diagrams, it's fairly intuitive. So like the point of the diagram is if you're tracking C and you're tracking B, then by definition, you're still getting the B to C because there's subsets of C and B. So you have to, that question about like, will you get alerted on B to C or C to B? It happens because you're tracking B and C anyway. So like there's some mental logic there that you have to understand. But if you don't get that, it's really simple. So like once you have your B and your C, all you got to do is camera settings, alerts, and then on alert, and just add them. Like it's just that simple for this one. So you're saying for you want an alert, like push notification for just area C, right?
Right.
And that's all you got to do. And then you have to do all. So this is saying like, I'm gonna get a push once there's some activity on C, okay? So like say it goes from B to C, you're still gonna get it because it's like B to C still means it goes to C. You see what I'm saying? That's kind of the logic that I'm trying to like, trying to get you guys to understand. So even if it goes from B to C, C will still get identified.
Great. That's perfect.
Okay. And don't forget the weight because you're tracking two
I
things.
see the all and the any. What else is in those options? All, any, and equal, was it?
Yeah. So yeah, that's a good question. So once you start playing with multiple zones like you're doing, like the B and the C and stuff, any is, so in your case, you're gonna have an A, B, and a C, right? Any means if any if C was hit, if any of your regions hit, like right, Ken, like this means A, B, or C. If it hits any of them, it'll still fire, right?
Yeah, the any acts like an or, and the all acts like and. It needs to have all of them. And equal would be not, it excludes the ones that you haven't checked. So if something came on H, it wouldn't hit with the equal symbol, but it would hit with the all symbol.
Right, but like in this scenario, he's got three regions, A, B, and C.
Hmm.
If he just had any, if it just went to B, it would still fire, right?
Even though there's no check in the B box?
Yeah. The only reason a B would come into play being unchecked is if you use the equal sign. Otherwise, if you just have C selected, any or all will work. You could use any or all in this case, because it's all of your selected ones. You've only selected C. So C is all, and C is
Okay.
also any in this case.
Okay, and so if I had A, B, and C selected with equal, I would need motion in all three of them at the same time in order to get this alert to fire.
That's true, and not in D, E, F, G, or H.
Gotcha.
And what you want is all, because this means either C.
Well, if I've only got one checked, I could select any or all, right?
That's good.
Okay.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, that's true. Okay.
All right. I think that's cleared up. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thanks, Josh. Eric, allowed to talk. You're muted, Eric.
Hey, sorry about that.
No worries.
Good morning. Yeah, I also use quite a few Amcrest cameras, and I've been having some issues recently with zones not recording properly and some ghosting. So I rediscovered a handful of them, deleted them, recreated them. And I'm wondering, can you talk to, is there a benefit of a camera setting that matches the model versus just the on-VIF, which is what typically gets detected when you do a find on one of their cameras? Is there a benefit to one over the other?
So the short answer is yes. Can you want to chime in, or want me to just answer it?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so
Yeah.
like the OnVIF stuff, like whatever the camera provider provided via OnVIF, you can pull, which is fine. And you know, for most of you guys, it might just work, which is fine. But like when you start doing like, if there's like other stuff, like I guess the biggest one is like audio. Like for some reason, the camera vendors don't provide audio access via OnVIF, and so oftentimes Ken digs into the camera and pulls out the audio, like he'll,
Gotcha.
you know,
Okay.
get those commands. And
Yeah.
that's when, yeah, that's when you start using the custom ones, because it just provides more functionality that is in the camera that isn't provided by OnVIF.
But from a
And
quality and
to
video
the
standpoint,
audio, there's also PTZ commands that may only be in the custom configuration.
gotcha. That makes sense.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
from an image quality standpoint, no difference. It really shouldn't affect that at all.
No, they're both using RTSP.
Thank you.
And in general, like start with OnVIF, and you can keep it if you want. Like, you know, mine is, I'm using RTSP just because I'm connecting to an NVR, but you may want to just flip it over. So once you do the find and inspect and do the OnVIF, you might want to just try, like, you know, there's nothing wrong in trying, right? You can like flip it and then hit OK, and it might give you better results, more functionality. So like if you're doing, if it has audio, for example, and your audio is not working, like a simple check is just to try the make and model that's provided by Blue Iris,
Right.
and
Right.
that might just get you going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, in this case, it was mostly just, like I said, zones not firing or firing when there's nothing, you know, when they're masked, just oddball things like that. Ghosting seemed to be related to an update and the decode setting being set to default or any. I had to, for some reason, move it to no. And that seems to have cleared the ghosting problem.
Oh, okay, okay, yeah, like that kind of stuff. Yeah, and that brings up a good topic as well. Like maybe we'll close with that. But I do a brain dump anytime you guys come up with things that don't work. I try to you know, record that so that it's available for all you guys. So in onboarding, like this camera optimization article, this is getting bigger and bigger and bigger just because we got all different categories. Like this is this article is really about like this, like how do you set up your cameras to work well with Blue Iris settings? And it's a mix and match. Like there's all these camera settings up here, and then you got the hardware, like hardware to code stuff settings, and it just, this article is getting longer and longer. Like the ghosting, how do you solve that? The artifacts and the streams, how do you solve that? So if you connect your cameras with OnVIF and it's glitchy, like the streams aren't good, or there's artifacts in the video, this is like a really good article to go to, just because I just keep adding to it based off of user tickets.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, it's 9:30. I think we'll close it unless there's one last question. If you have a pressing question, ask it now. Otherwise, we'll call it a day. Looks like it's quiet. Okay, Ken. I think it's already 9:30. So I was going to talk about this really cool. I'll just give you a preview right now. So in DeepStack, when you get time, like Ken just cranked out this really cool functionality to like really understand what's going on with DeepStack, and it's really easy. So it's documented, and I'll talk about it in 2 weeks, I guess, because we're running out of time here. But in fine tuning and troubleshooting, there's a really cool tool called what's it called again? What's it called?
It's called the DeepStack log right now. Status page, DeepStack.
DeepStack analysis. Yeah, here it is. deep sec analysis in the settings. And I walked through it here, like it tells you like each frame that was analyzed and what was found. Like it's super. It just makes debug fine tuning very, very easy now. So that's a little preview.
Coming to that as well, this with the release today. For one, you can show the blue iris motion rectangles as well on this page. And so you can see why things weren't matched up. That if you can see the icon in there, it shows like the motion icon is used in this image, and that's showing that the object wasn't within a place where blue iris was also detecting motion. So you'll be able to use that for tuning as well now.
Yeah, like that's a good point. Like see this camera fired because of motion on the trees, and there's a car here, but like this is one of the huge value adds of the integration of motion with AI. Like if you didn't have the motion, you would fire an alert, which would be a false alert because this car is parked, but Ken takes that into account, which is a huge value add. And another big takeaway is like now I would block out the trees because it's wasting resource on my computer, right? So like now I know, like I would just have this blocked out to the top of block off all the trees, whatever. So it's a really cool tool. Like it really lets you optimize as well as troubleshoot, and so that's a preview. I'll go into this more in 2 weeks, like how to tie all this stuff together, like motion and AI, and really fine tune your system. So that's all we had. No other questions. Thank you guys. Ken, closing thoughts before we leave?
Once again, thanks for attending. Look for an update today of the software.
Okay, bye guys.